Montana Territory, May 1884. The rain came down like the sky had split open, thick and cold, turning the red earth road outside the small town of Willow Creek into a river of mud. Hudson Delaney had seen storms before, but this one had teeth. He pulled his duster tighter around him, boots squelching as he led his horse toward the edge of town. The wedding had emptied the saloon, half the town crammed into that little clapboard church. Not that Hudson had any interest in ceremonies. He had come for grain and nails. He had not expected to see her. She stumbled out of the church, veil torn, dress soaked and dragging in the mud like a dead thing. A child clung to her hip, her small arms wrapped tight around the woman's neck. The girl's dress was wet through, her cheeks streaked with tears and dirt, but her voice rang clear as a bell. "Daddy." Hudson stopped cold. The woman froze too, her eyes locking on his. Even through the rain, he saw the shock hit her like a bullet to the chest. She looked like hell-face, pale, hair plastered to her skin, bouquet crushed in one hand. But it was her. Naomi Jensen. He had not seen her in 6 years. The child shifted, clutching tighter. "Daddy, you came." Hudson's pulse thudded in his throat. The little girl was no older than 5. Her hair was the same shade as Naomi's dark chestnut, curling in the wet, and her eyes were wide and waiting. Naomi blinked, lips parting, but no words came out. "Naomi," Hudson said, his voice low. She swayed on her feet. I didn't know you were still in Montana." "I was not." He looked at the child again. "She yours?" Naomi's arms tightened around the girl. "Yes." The girl looked up at Naomi, confused. "But you said he was." "Shay," Naomi said gently, brushing a hand down her daughter's soaked back. "Not now, sweetheart." The church doors banged open behind them. A man's voice shouted, "Where the hell did she go?" Naomi flinched. Her chin lifted, but her eyes were frightened. Hudson stepped forward. "Who left you at the altar?" Naomi's jaw tightened. "His name does not matter." "I do not want you involved." "Too late." "Hudson, I am not letting you and your daughter walk through this storm in that dress with a man yelling behind you." Naomi's lips trembled. "I did not know where else to go." "You do now." He reached for her, and she hesitated only a second before placing her hand in his. Hudson's cabin sat 12 miles north, tucked into the foothills. The ride was slow, mud slicked the trail, and Naomi's dress tangled around the saddle. Shay rode with her, small hands gripping her waist, silent now except to ask once if they were safe. Naomi said yes. Hudson did not speak. Inside the cabin, Naomi stood dripping on the floorboards, her veil discarded by the hearth. Shay curled up in a blanket beside the fire, eyes heavy from the ride. Naomi watched her daughter a moment, then turned to Hudson. "She thought you were her father." She said it like she believed it. "She does." Hudson's voice was quiet. "Is she?" Naomi's breath caught. "No." "But I told her stories growing up. About a cowboy who once rode with me to Cheyenne, who gave me a silver pin and kissed me before the train left." Hudson felt something twist deep in his chest. "You told her about me. You were the only good thing I could tell her about." He stepped closer. "What happened, Naomi?" She dropped her gaze. "I was 17 when I left Cheyenne, found work in Helena, met a man. I thought he was kind. He was not. When I told him I was pregnant, he left town." Hudson's jaw clenched. "I did not tell anyone. I raised her alone." She looked up, eyes shining. "I never forgot you." The storm outside cracked loud, but inside the cabin everything was still. Hudson reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. "You should have come to me. I thought you were gone. I never would have walked away." Naomi's breath hitched. "He left me today. Said he couldn't raise another man's child. Said I tricked him. The whole town saw." Hudson looked over at the small bundle curled by the fire. "She is not another man's child. She is yours." Naomi's shoulders shook. She turned her face away, but he caught her wrist gently. You and Shay can stay here as long as you want, as long as you need. I have nothing, no money, no place to live. You have me. Naomi looked up, eyes wide. Why? Because I never stopped caring about you. Because your girl called me dad and it did not feel wrong. Because you are standing here soaked and heartbroken and still the strongest woman I have ever known. She stared at him, lips parted, eyes full hope, fear, disbelief. I am not going to leave you, Hudson said. Not now, not ever. Naomi stepped in, head resting against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. By the fire, Shay stirred and whispered, Is he really my dad now? Hudson looked down at Naomi. She was crying quietly, but her nod was sure. Yes, baby, she said softly. He is. Hudson felt something settle deep inside him. A kind of peace he had not known in years. He looked at Naomi, her face tucked against his shirt, and whispered, You are home now. Morning brought quiet. The rain had passed in the night, leaving the earth heavy, the air smelling of pine and wet ash. A thin fog hung low through the trees behind the cabin, still as breath held too long. Inside, the fire had burned to embers. Hudson stepped outside with an axe in one hand, and the weight of what had changed lodged somewhere behind his ribs. He set to splitting wood without hurry, letting each strike settle the thoughts piling behind his eyes, the way Naomi had leaned into him, how her daughter had watched him like he was something solid in a world that had turned too loose. Inside, Naomi tucked Shay's damp dress into the wash basin. The cabin held the scent of boiled coffee and old pine. She hadn't asked for anything, but when Hudson returned, she had already swept the hearth and folded the wool blanket that had warmed them. She didn't move like a guest. I'll clean the rest after breakfast, she said without looking up. You don't have to, I know. Shay sat cross-legged on the floor near the stove, drawing circles in the dust with a scrap of charcoal. She didn't speak much, but her eyes followed Hudson when he moved, quiet and careful. Naomi stepped outside while Hudson stirred the oats. The sun was breaking through now, warm and pale on her shoulders. She walked past the hitch post, down to the edge of the trees where birds flitted low and water dripped from the branches. When Hudson joined her, she didn't turn. She's never seen a man stay, Naomi said, voice low. She's seen one now. You don't know what that means to her. I might not, he said, but I know what it means to me. She glanced at him, then away again. I didn't plan to come here, I know. I thought I could make it work, get married, give her something steady, but he wasn't who he said. Hudson watched her hands. They were still folded tight. You ever think about leaving Montana? I used to, she said, but not anymore. Why? Because Shay's growing. She needs somewhere she can put roots, and I need to stop running. Hudson let that settle. You can stay here, for good. Naomi looked at him then. You'd want that. I wouldn't offer if I didn't. She studied his face like she was reading a letter she hadn't dared open. I can work, she said. So cook whatever you need. It's not about need. Then what is it? He hesitated, just a breath. I want to build something that lasts. Naomi's eyes softened, but she didn't answer. Instead, she turned back to the trees, her voice barely above a whisper. I used to sit up with her at night, tell her stories about a man who wasn't afraid of storms. She thought I made you up. Hudson exhaled. I'm real, and I'm not going anywhere. She nodded once, then walked back up toward the house, slow and steady. Later, while Shay napped on a cot Hudson had dragged from the loft, Naomi helped hang the laundry. The wind had picked up, tugging at the linen as they pinned it. I'll need to find schooling for her, Naomi said, handing him a clothespin. There's a woman teaches letters down in Willow Creek. Widow named Mrs. Drummond. She's stern but fair. Naomi's mouth twisted into something just short of a smile. You know everybody. Not everybody, just the ones who make life easier or harder, She nodded. I want her to have a better life. You're giving her one. Naomi looked at him, the lines around her eyes more delicate in the sunlight. And what about you, Hudson? He drove the last pin in, the sheet snapping into place between them. I think I've been waiting for something to feel right, he said. And now it does. She didn't speak. But when her hand brushed his as they reached for the same corner of the clothesline, she didn't pull away. That evening, they sat outside while Shay chased moths in the dusk. Hudson poured coffee into 2 tin cups, passing one to Naomi. She held it tight between both palms. You never married? No, why not? I guess I never found the right reason. Naomi's gaze lingered on him. And now I think I've got 2. She looked over at Shay, laughing barefoot in the grass, then back at Hudson. The sun had dipped behind the ridge, the sky streaked in lavender and gold. Naomi leaned just a little closer, not enough to touch, but enough that he felt her warmth. I don't want to be someone's burden, she said. You're not. She looked down at her cup. You're sure? With everything I've got. When Shay tired and climbed into Naomi's lap, the girl was already half asleep. Naomi rocked gently, her voice soft. She's never had a place that felt like it could hold her. She does now. Naomi looked up, and this time she didn't look away. The next week folded itself into rhythm slowly, like a song Naomi hadn't heard in years but still remembered the tune to. Each morning, Hudson saddled his gelding and rode out before the sun cleared the ridge, making rounds through the pasture and checking the fencing along the east slope. Naomi and Shay stayed behind, the cabin warm with bread baking and small feet padding across pine floors. One morning, Naomi stood in the doorway, apron dusted with flour. You've got a split rail along the back fence, she said as Hudson tightened his bedroll across the saddle. Shay and I walk that way when the sun's high. Saw a calf out past it. Hudson finished with the rope, then looked up. You think you can help me mend it? I've got strong hands, she said. And I can swing a hammer straighter than most. He nodded once. We'll go after supper. The days didn't ask for much, but they gave quietly small things that built a life. Naomi set aside her needlework to help Hudson repair a broken latch on the barn. Shay picked wild onions and wrapped them in old cotton. Hudson carved her a button whistle, and she blew it until the dog from the neighboring homestead showed up 3 mornings in a row. By the time the sun began to stretch longer across the hills, Naomi had found a corner of the cabin for her sewing, and Shay had claimed the window bench as her own. The girl sat there now, tracing a stick through a pan of cornmeal while Naomi pressed stitches into a worn quilt top. They'll ask questions in town, Naomi said quietly, not looking up. They already have, Hudson replied, setting a split piece of kindling beside the stove. Mrs. Drummond sent up a parcel, said she's holding a seat for Shay come autumn. Naomi's hand stilled. What did you tell her? That you and your daughter are living here now, and that she ought to mind her own business. Naomi gave a quiet exhale that might have been a laugh if it weren't so tight. Did they say anything about the church? They said the groom took a horse and left a note. That he owed money in butt. His name was Allen. Naomi folded her cloth. He promised he'd take care of her, said he didn't mind she wasn't his. Hudson crouched beside the stove and fed in another piece of wood. A man who means what he says doesn't run. I thought I saw something in him. I was just tired of being alone. You're not anymore, Hudson said. Naomi didn't answer at first. Her eyes lingered on the darning needle, the thread caught mid-loop before she said, There's things you don't know about me. I'm not asking for perfect. I've stolen bread when I didn't have coin. I've lied to keep a roof over our heads. Hudson straightened. You've kept her safe. Her eyes flicked up to meet his. That's not nothing, is it? No, he said. It's everything. That evening they walked the ridge where the fence had sagged low. Naomi carried the hammer. Hudson hauled a bundle of rails. Shay trailed behind, collecting stones and wildflowers into her skirt. "You ever think you'd end up here?" Hudson asked, fitting the post into the earth. "I used to dream of San Francisco," Naomi replied. "Big houses, people who didn't know your past. Still want that?" She shook her head. "No. I want a place where my daughter can grow without being looked down on, where I can plant something and watch it take root." "This is that place," Hudson said. Naomi drove the nail in firm. "Then I'll stay." They worked until the fence stood straight again, the last nail set just as the sun brushed gold across the tops of the trees. Shay held up her bouquet of weeds and tiny blossoms, offering it to Hudson with a grin too wide for her face. "For you," she said. He took it, careful not to crush the petals. "Thank you." Naomi's hand brushed his as she passed him the hammer. "You make it easy to believe good men are still out there." Hudson didn't say anything. He just looked at her in the falling light, the way her hair caught the color of dusk, how her face had settled into something steadier than weariness. They walked home together, slow. Shay slept before her head hit the pillow. Hudson sat on the front step, the wildflower bouquet resting beside him. Naomi joined him after the lantern was out, arms folded against the evening chill. "You planning to winter here like always?" "I was. We'll need to put up more preserves." "I'll help." She leaned against the doorframe. "I was always the one doing the saving." Hudson looked up at her. "You don't have to anymore." Naomi's voice was quiet but steady. "I want to stay, not just for Shay." He stood slowly, brushing the dust from his trousers. "Then stay for me." She reached out, took his hand. No trembling this time, no hesitation. "I'm not leaving this time," she said. Hudson closed his fingers around hers. "Good." By early June, the mountains shed their last traces of snow, and the creek behind the cabin ran full and quick with meltwater. The days stretched longer, not just in light but in the way time seemed to ease its shoulders, no longer braced against storms or sudden turns. Hudson found himself rising before dawn not out of obligation, but habit. And when he returned from checking the upper pasture, he'd pause a moment just to hear Naomi's voice drifting from the kitchen, or to catch the sound of Shay's laughter as she chased after the hens. That afternoon, Naomi was bent over a ledger as Hudson stepped inside. Her hair was tied back in a kerchief, and her face was flushed from standing over the stove. "You've been writing near an hour," he said, setting a bucket of fresh water beside the door. "Something wrong?" She dipped the pen once more before answering. "I'm sorting what we've got against what we'll need come November. There's less flour than I thought. We'll need to trade for sacks before the end of summer." Hudson leaned his shoulder against the wall. "I can ride into Virginia City next week, take a few pelts and the last of the dried apples." "I was thinking I'd go with you," Naomi said. "Shay too, she's never seen a town that size." He watched her for a moment. "You sure that's what you want?" "I've spent years hiding from folks." "I don't want to do that anymore," he nodded slowly. "We'll take the wagon, camp just outside town, make a day of it." She smiled, not wide but steady. "I'd like that." Out back, Shay called out something about a toad in the watering trough, and Naomi stood, brushing her hands on her skirt. "She's been asking about school." "She'll do fine with Mrs. Drummond," Hudson said, "sharp as she is." "She wants to know if you'll walk her there the first day." Hudson didn't hesitate. "Of course I will." Naomi looked at him then, a long look, not searching but knowing. "You make promises like they're bricks in a wall." "They ought to be." Later, while Naomi taught Shay to thread a needle, Hudson took to the barn. The wagon needed a new axle pin, and the left rear wheel had loosened from the last hard pull down the ridge. He worked with care, hands steady, sweat beading along his brow. He didn't rush. There was time now. As the sun dipped behind the slope and the air cooled, Naomi stepped into the barn doorway. She carried a tin mug, the scent of mint rising from it. "You missed supper," she said, offering the drink. "I figured you'd keep something warm. There's stew in the Dutch oven." He took the mug, drank slow. "You always this good at managing a household?" Naomi leaned against the beam. "I learned out of necessity. No one else was going to do it. You ever think about running your own place? You offering, I'm asking." She tilted her head. "You mean it?" "I wouldn't say it otherwise." He set the mug aside. "I've been on my own a long time, never thought much about changing that. But then you came walking through the rain and everything shifted." Naomi stepped closer, boots scuffing soft against the straw. "You're not just saying that because you feel sorry for me." "I don't feel sorry. I feel sure." She reached out, fingers brushing the back of his hand. "Then ask me again. Run this place with me. Raise Shay here. Build something worth passing down." Naomi's voice didn't waver. "Yes." The quiet that followed wasn't empty, it was full, settled like earth after planting. Hudson took her hand in both of his, rough palms wrapping around her finer ones. She didn't pull away. When they returned to the cabin, Shay had fallen asleep curled up in one of Hudson's old shirts. Naomi tucked the girl in while Hudson banked the fire. No words were needed. That night, they sat at the table long after the lamplight flickered low. Plans spread before them in the form of seed catalogs, spare coin, and a list Naomi had penned of what the cabin needed before winter. But it wasn't the lists that mattered. It was the way she reached for his hand without thinking, the way their eyes met over the lantern's glow and didn't look away. And when the last flame burned down, Hudson stood, held out his hand, and Naomi rose with him. Not as a guest, not as a woman passing through, but as the one who'd chosen to stay. The trip to Virginia City came 3 days before the summer solstice, with the sky high and clear, the air dry enough to lift dust from the wagon wheels as they rolled south. Naomi packed bread wrapped in cloth, slices of cold roast, and a jar of pickled carrots for the road. Shay rode between them, her knees drawn up beneath her cotton dress, face turned to the wind as the hills passed by. Hudson drove easy, one hand on the reins, the other resting on his thigh. He watched the road but glanced at Naomi more than he needed to. She had changed her hair that morning, braided it close to her scalp and wrapped it in a kerchief the color of wheat. It suited her, and he told her so. "You talk like I'm something worth noticing," Naomi said, faint and amused. "You are," he said, plain as fact. They didn't rush. They stopped once to let Shay stretch her legs and again when Naomi spotted a patch of wild currants growing near a dry wash. She gathered them quickly, fingers deft, while Shay helped carry the tin pail. By the time they reached the edge of town, the sun had dipped behind the taller buildings, casting long shadows through the streets. Naomi lifted Shay into her arms as they passed the first storefront, careful not to let the child's bare heels brush the wagon wheel. Hudson tied the team outside a dry goods store with a red-painted porch. "We won't be long," he said. "No point in drawing eyes after sundown." Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust. Naomi guided Shay toward the bolts of muslin while Hudson gathered the things they needed: flour, lamp oil, 2 new spools of thread. When he turned back, Naomi was speaking low to an older woman behind the counter, her posture straight but her voice gentle. "She's mine," Naomi said. "And she'll be starting school in the fall." The woman nodded once, neither cold nor warm. "She'll need a slate and chalk." Hudson stepped up, placing the list on the counter. "Add it to the tally and put in a spool of green if you've got it." Naomi glanced sideways at him. "Green," he shrugged. "You like it." They didn't linger. The town held memories for Naomi she didn't speak aloud, faces who'd seen her at her lowest, voices that had likely whispered behind her back. But she walked through it without faltering, her daughter's hand tucked in hers, her chin lifted. That night they camped beside the Cottonwood Creek, the wagon pulled off the road beneath a stand of ash trees. Naomi laid a blanket near the fire and peeled an apple for Shay while Hudson unpacked the bedrolls. Shay fell asleep with her head in Naomi's lap, a half-eaten slice still clutched in one hand. Hudson took it gently, wrapped it in cloth, and set it aside. "You didn't have to come," he said after a long silence. "I wanted to." He studied the firelight flickering across her face. "You're not just staying because it's safe, are you?" "No," she said. "I'm staying because you see me the way I've always wanted to be seen, and because she needs someone who keeps his word, and because I want to wake up beside you." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers sliding against hers. "Then marry me." Naomi's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. "You sure?" "I've been sure since the day you walked out of that church holding her." She looked down at Shay, then back at him. "Yes." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. The wedding was small, held at the edge of the meadow behind the cabin, where the wild grasses had grown in thick and tall. Mrs. Drummond came, bringing a covered dish and a Bible. The neighbor boy carried a bouquet of wildflowers cut straight from the slope. Shay wore a ribbon Hudson had bought in town, and Naomi sewed her own dress from the bolt of green muslin. They said their vows with the wind in the trees and the sound of water moving through the creek below. Naomi's voice didn't shake. Hudson's hand didn't tremble. When he kissed her, it was not the kiss of a man who had taken something, it was the kiss of a man who had waited and hoped and finally been given what he never thought he'd deserve. They built onto the cabin that fall a second room for Shay, a small porch where Naomi could sit with her mending in the late afternoon light. Hudson taught Shay to ride, starting with a sway-backed mare too old for the range. Naomi planted a row of kitchen herbs and hung dried bundles from the rafters. The days passed slow and full, each one stacking into the next like wood on a well-laid fire. Winter came early, with snow thick on the ridge by late October. But the cabin was warm, the pantry full, and the beds layered in quilts. Naomi read aloud to Shay by lamplight while Hudson mended harnesses by the stove. Sometimes, Naomi would catch his eye across the room and smile, and he'd feel the same quiet certainty in his chest that he'd felt when he first led them through the storm. One night after the girl had gone to sleep, Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "You gave us a home." Hudson wrapped his arm around her waist. "You made it one." They sat like that until the fire died low. Their life was not grand, nor loud, nor fast. But it was real and lasting, and it held everything they had once thought they'd lost. And when spring returned again, it found them still there together, steady and finally at peace.